Hey, so I wanted to take a look at the flying knives here. This is a new weapon that was recently released on the test server, I think as of 3 days ago. So no official release yet, but I did want to take a early look and just sort of see how the weapon feels and functions, that kind of thing. The reason for that is because it is a projectile-based melee weapon, which is pretty unique in its own right. So there was interest in seeing how that sort of plays out from a mid to long range perspective. And then of course it's always nice to just get a general feel for a new weapon. And then for a second separate section, I thought we'd look at how the knives feel in the hands of Temulch, so to speak. So what your different combo options are, how you optimize your damage output, different mix-up options, openers, things like that. So if you are interested in Temulch specifically, stick around for that. So as you can see from these basic attacks here, both the right click and left click have the ability to send out a projectile. They both have the ability to send out a melee attack. It really just comes down to in what order they're being pressed. And here's a look at the focus attacks as well as a couple follow-up options. Probably worth noting that the RMB follow-up has quite a bit of ground coverage to it, so it will be good for closing gaps quickly. So my next order of business was to kind of do a top-down look in terms of the different damage values. So you have your basic attacks, your focused attacks, your 1-2 combinations, and then in this case we also have the grapple combo involved, which is one of my main 3 takeaways, being that it just simply exists. So you can grapple combo with this weapon, and it is quite good, giving you 1491 damage. The other takeaway being that LMB is just good. So LMB is going to give you 155 damage per use on the standard basic attack. So when you have the ability to kind of mix in the LMB with your combos, it's going to be better than the RMB for just strictly damage. Lastly, focus attacks are essentially the same. So your RMB focus, your LMB focus, 750 versus 756 damage. Really not much to think about in terms of which is going to give you better return. And then more on the mobility and defensive side of things, I just wanted to see how the scale rush would look in terms of the distance and speed. Overall it seems to be good, not on par with something like a dagger or fan. You're not going to get the same distance that you would with the pole sword either, but it is pretty good in terms of the distance, and there is a little bit of a lead up, a slight pause before the jump actually comes out, but it is overall performing pretty solidly in that domain. And it does seem to be pretty mediocre in terms of just how you would traverse the map with this weapon, kiting away from opponents and so forth. You are probably going to be using a combination of the horizontal or the half-charge horizontal for getting a lot of your ground coverage in. Overall, it's not looking too special here. So the next thing I wanted to look at was the range of the throwing knives and how that's affected by either different attack types, or if you are looking at a focus attack, basically the length of the hold and how that may or may not correlate with your max range there. Simply put, I found it a little bit underwhelming in terms of what the max range is, and there's not a lot of variance that I can detect. So whether it's an LMB and RMB, if you're just briefly holding for 0.9 or 1.0 or all the way up to a 2.0, it's not going to really send out a super far projectile. I do know the Wisp, for example, has a 37.5 meter range on it. This will fall far short of that, so that is something to consider when you are engaged with your opponents. So in just playing with the weapon for a few minutes, you'll probably find that the RMB is applying a stagger, and it can be used as a soft true combo starter. So knowing what we know about the distance, which appears to be about 15 meters, you can actually lead with the RMB from distance, close the gap, and get right into your combo. So this is very unique and likely provides a lot of stock in terms of the overall strength of this weapon. And I did find something pretty interesting here, being that if I'm pressed up right against my opponent, they are sometimes able to dodge out of this. So this seems to imply that if you're in that mid to long range for this RMB attack, that it is going to be a consistent combo starter option, but you might not be able to get super close to them and have that same result. And on the subject of RMBs, we did mention earlier that the LMB is actually going to grant you more damage, generally speaking, but I did find that mid-combo it is going to actually be more consistent to get the RMB involved there. This is just because it seems to elevate the opponent in a different way. But with that being said, you can see it is actually possible to land this combo using LMB, 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 but in my experience that's just not as consistent. My next observation in training was that the RMB focus appears to actually have several advantages over the LMB focus. So not only can you move around freely with it charged, but interactions that feature parries indicate different levels of consequence. You'll see here from this range that my RMB focus release lets me actually keep my weapon despite the parry, and on the LMB side, the same could not be said. And this is less of a discovery than it is just simply theorizing, but I am wondering if it's possible to release a focus attack and purposely miss, for example right next to the opponent's head. That way you could bait out the parry and potentially still get the punish before they have a chance to dodge out of that animation. This does remain to be seen real time. I realize that there are a couple contributing factors such as your relative spacing and the ping between the players, but it might be worth exploring. So taking what we know about the flying knives so far, I thought we could have a look at how that might factor in when playing Temulch. And in the first situation here, we can see the wisps being used as an opener, so once they've been caught, we're looking at how can we extract the most damage in the most consistent way possible. And I did want to mention that in several of these combos I am utilizing the third tick of the wisp here, so if anyone is unclear as to how that's affecting the combo damage or the trajectory of the opponent, I would encourage you to just look back on the guide that I published a couple months ago where it is covered in detail. Here we can see the wisp operating as a combo extender. Paired with the flying knives and the LMB catch, you're actually able to produce quite a bit of damage. I thought I'd throw in a second alternative here. This isn't quite the same damage if you're on flat terrain, but I think it could be pretty good if you're going downhill. And we can definitely take some of those prior concepts and pair that with Temulch's ultimate. This will give you a couple different avenues for getting a infinite or TOD combo on your enemy. And lastly, we can take a look at how to just get the opponent stuck in the wall via a standard opener. This is, of course, Temulch's unique CC ability in which the opponent is unable to use their ability if they are stuck in that wall. So as we can see, there are quite a few ways to incorporate the abilities of the weapon with those of Temulch. And if we look back to the numbers really quick here, we do see that the max guaranteed punish is very high with the flying knives. It's right there with the katana essentially. So not only do you have that punish potential, but there are 4 different ways to attack an opponent who is trapped in a wisp, and you will be able to still retain the stagger. So this of course leads to different combo options. So all in all, given its punish potential, the range of the weapon, and then a couple different mix-up options, I think this is going to be a very strong weapon, not just in the hands of Temulch, but with any character in the game.